Evening, everyone. Welcome. Any questions tonight?
A couple of evenings ago, you were describing, when you were speaking about Mahaprabhu speaking with Prakashananda Saraswati and the Mayavadis, that at one point you were describing how Buddhism took off from the Upanishads, and Shankara and the Vaishnava Sampradaya stem from study of the Vedanta Sutra. Did I hear that correctly?
The idea is that the prominent face of the followers of the Veda at the time of the Buddha were those who followed the Veda in pursuit of material acquisition. In the Gita, Krishna says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistrigunya Vavarjana, Nirbandhanita Sattvastona Yoga Chamatma. He says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda. Traigunya means the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. That means Nirguna means beyond the world, transcendence. So he says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda. The subject of the Vedas is primarily that which is found within the influence of the three gunas. So the Vedas have both material and spiritual knowledge. And given that the majority of the Veda deals with material knowledge, the majority of the people who are the followers of the Vedas are interested in material, life of material acquisition. You can call it the karma marg, the path of karma. It's a way of pursuing material acquisition that is organized and systematic and takes into consideration various influences in nature, acknowledges, for example, in the basic sense that one's individual pursuit of sense objects through their senses is dependent upon something in the macrocosm or nature, in order for that, it corresponds with that particular sense, in order for that to be, that object to be attained. For example, eyes. With eyes, we want to see certain objects of sight, forms, but we're dependent upon light, or the sun, for example, in order to see. So sun light corresponds with the eyes, and it's an example of something in the macrocosm of nature that corresponds with the microcosm of nature in the form of our body, and this particularly in the form of eyes. So the eyes pursue senses, objects of sight, and they're dependent upon sun in order to do so. Light. So we have a relationship with nature, and properly understood, we're dependent entities, and with some gratitude, we should acknowledge our dependence, and then we can arguably live happy in the pursuit of material acquisition, except for the fact that that doesn't change the fact that material acquisition is something that is not ours to keep, or even if it was, the body through which we seek to acquire it for doesn't endure. So, although we're talking about a gratitude-filled life of material pursuit, a religious orientation to life, it has its shortcomings. The whole idea of material acquisition is problematic because what we acquire we cannot keep, and we're attached to things that we cannot keep, and those very things that we think will be the source of our happiness are a source of our stress. So that's problematic in general, but this is where most people are at. So most people are in pursuit of material acquisition. So let's license it. So to speak, let's regulate it. If people are going to smoke marijuana, let's regulate it. Let's tax it. Something like that. So if living beings in human dress coming out of animality are now coming to humanity, let's temper, color, shade that humanity with spirituality by way of recognizing that the pursuit of human life, the call of the human senses, if you will, it should be done in the context of understanding that we're dependent entities and so on. So we should appreciate the sun and the wind, the rain, and so they're the gods and goddesses of in Hinduism, and properly understood through the veneration of them and so forth constitutes living with a sense of gratitude, and you have a license for sense indulgence whereby you will not get the kind of karmic effects that might be negative, as you would get from stealing something, for example. So that the whole pursuit of your material life, if you will, which in just a broad generic sense is a life of acquisition. It's a life of pursuing material happiness through acquiring and avoiding material stress. That's basically the sum and substance of it. So do it in the best possible way that you'll get the best possible results. And so the idea is that such a life, properly performed, can culminate in a heavenly type of existence, where there will be an enduring life of sense indulgence without the repercussions of death and others in disease for a long time, longer than we can imagine. This is the idea given in the sacred text. So it's almost like so long that it sounds like forever, but of course it's not. And any amount of time is insignificant in comparison to eternity. So that's why Krishna says, we cited this verse the other night in the Gita, Abrahma Bhuvanaloka Punaravartino Arjuna. From the Brahmaloka, highest planet as it's thought, on down, whose life is many times longer than the denizens of heavens, it's thought. Everyone has to die. Abrahma Bhuvanaloka Punaravartino Arjuna. But by contrast, Mamupeta to Konteya, one who comes to me, my abode, implications, they don't have to take birth again. So they acquire, if you will, themselves, which never dies anyway, in a knowing sense of what myself is, separate from the body, separate from the mind. And that by way of a super acknowledgement, if you will, not only of gratitude shown in terms of acknowledging one's dependence in the pursuit of fruits of one's actions, but acknowledging the source, if you will, even the gods, and entering into the life of devotion. So it's one thing to live religiously and acquire and worship gods to get things. It's another thing to do bhakti. I've given an example before that years ago, we were young, when Prabhupada first took us to Vrindavan, he had acquired a piece of property way in the outskirts in Ramanreti, that was by way of a donation. And he was just beginning to build his Krishna Balaram Mandir there. And so the nearest market in town was Loi Bazaar, which is Loi means wool. So it was a wool merchant's market. But in the wool merchant's market, there was, it's like if you go to some market in town and on that street, there's a lot of shoe stores. There are other little stores too. So that was the nearest market, and we would go to that market to get whatever, to get tilak, to get beads, to get a little crown for our deity, and so forth. So Loi Bazaar became the place where Prabhupada's Western disciples were going shopping when they were in Vrindavan. They were shopping for deities and for their temple and for their personal devotional attire, to get saris the ladies would buy and dhotis and so forth. And so all the merchants in Loi Bazaar, they liked us very much. And after some time, they were getting wealthy comparatively. And after a while, you'd see this was going on for years. So it became probably the wealthiest market in Vrindavan, at one point. I have seen like at least three generations now, because the father became knew his son became the owner, father retired, and now his son's son is running the shop, like Dinesh Cloth, Dinesh Cloth Merchant. Dinesh became famous because of me. His shop flourished because of me, because there was another shop, Ganga Prasad, that sold cloth also, and they were way more popular. But Dinesh was the son of Dinesh, and then he was just a young boy. He would come up on a bicycle to Krishna Balaram temple, seeking, business, so to speak. So he met me, and I understood what he was doing. So I felt compassionate, so I took him in. So I began to shop at his shop. Then he would take a picture, put my picture there, that kind of thing. Um, now his son is running the shop, and pretty soon it's going to his son's son. So it's been going on for a while. But at any rate, my point is that at a certain point, just like Dinesh took my picture and put it in his shop, and at a certain point, shopkeepers had Prabhupada's picture showing up in the shop. So we thought, oh, we'll go to that shop. They like Prabhupada. They worship Prabhupada. Yes, we worship Prabhupada here. So they love Prabhupada. They worship Prabhupada. Why? Because if they had his picture there, they knew we would come and buy. This is the karma mark. So we worship God for that. We worship Vishnu because if we worship Vishnu, we know then that's part of the varnashram system, and therefore our pursuit of good karma or material acquisition will be fruitful. There's not a lot of love there. It's a business arrangement. Bhakti, by comparison, obviously is very different. We worship Krishna, not for material acquisition, but for the sake of pleasing Krishna only. And so it has religious overtones in its appearance. It can be very worldly. It can involve being involved in all the things that worldly people in pursuit of material acquisition are involved in, but for the purpose of Krishna, for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. Bhakti is defined by Narada in the sutras as that which is performed by one's own senses for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevano Bhakti. So normally the karma mark is in pursuit of my own sense fulfillment. And bhakti, by contrast, is pursuit of the fulfillment of Krishna's senses. So you can understand activities of bhakti can parallel those of the karma marg. To be doing the same thing. You'd be shopping for your own senses. You'd be shopping like we were in the market for Krishna's senses, buy Krishna flutes and the deity and so forth, for example. They look exactly the same. And in between these two, you've got the Jnana Marg, where they have vairagya, detachment, and it doesn't look at all like material pursuit. So from that perspective, some in the Jnana Marg, they don't understand Bhakti Marg. They think it's some extended idea of the Karma Marg. But as I'm explaining, it's very different, even though it may look similar. Therefore, it said, Vaishnava Mukud Girim It's there. Its point is difficult to understand Vaishnav, his or her motives. The actions may be similar to an ordinary person, but the motives are different. Nabudai, yeah, Nabudai. So difficult to understand his or her motives. So this karma marg, this is not something that is just relative to India. It speaks of a certain orientation to life, a religious orientation to life in pursuit of material acquisition. And it's the broadest sense of religion, the lowest end on the religious ladder, if you will. It's described by Prahlad when he says in the Bhagavatam, Nasabhritisavaivanik, don't be a merchant, be a servant. Don't be a vanik, don't be a merchant, be a servant. This is a big difference. Merchant means I make an arrangement for you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. I'll do something for you. You give me this. Very good. Service is very different because without expectation of return, just for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. That is my return. That Krishna's senses are pleased. This is bhakti. Especially in the Vrindavan Marg, it comes to this samartha rati, where this pleasure of Krishna's senses is fully and wholly identified with the senses of the devotee. They have no other sense. There is a difference. There's the Krishna and there's the devotee, but there's a oneness. This is the oneness. The pleasure of his senses is their pleasure. This is fully manifested in Vrindavan, not so much in Dwarka, where there's some individual sense of identity by comparison on the part of the devotee. But the individuality in a sense of separateness is lost, even when there is the devotee and there is Krishna. So anyway, it's a very beautiful idea. Prahlad says it very nicely. Don't be a merchant, be a servant. Servant has no expectation other than to please the master. That is the fruit. That is the result he or she wants. So, that said, as I'm saying, the majority of people in the world, well, everybody is disposed to material acquisition. We think that by acquiring things, our life will be more complete. Because we don't know ourselves. We don't know that we are a unit of happiness. We are a unit of security. We are sat, we are chit, we are ananda. And so we want to be pleased, to be pleasured. We want to be secure. We want to know. We are a unit of knowing. We are a unit of loving. We are a unit of being. We want to be, we want to know, we want to love. That's the problem. Stop wanting to be, wanting to know, wanting to love. You are a unit of being, knowing, and loving. That's the secret of life. So everyone, if we come from animality, as I say, to humanity, we take some of the animality with us. We have now greater, in human life, greater capacity to reason, so we should reason about these things. And in human life, as I often say, we begin to ask the question why, rather than just how. So sometimes in the pursuit of our acquisition, which we bring with us from animality, this why gets in the way. Why question, why am I? Purpose, meaning, value, rather than just things. Acquiring, why? So this is a question that's coming from consciousness, not from the natural world, but from consciousness. Quality, value, this is all relative to consciousness. As I often say, we give value to matter. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. We means subjective sense of ourself. So this pops up in human life. It's troublesome. Kids ask these kinds of questions. Einstein was once asked how he became so. I never stopped asking questions that children ask. The parents say, don't here, play with something. That's too difficult, that question. You'll grow up and realize that question you can't answer. So those questions, we remain as children, as devotees, and keep asking those questions. Meaning, purpose. Why do we do that? Never mind, just do it. Okay, that's too complicated. I'm just giving you a simple example. Why am I? Nobody knows it. This is work. So no, those questions, the Buddha wanted to know the answer to those questions. And he experienced that people in general were not interested in those questions. There were four things that stood out to him. It said that the Buddha lived in a palace, and he was a prince, son of the king, and that the king wanted him to, obviously, to the throne, but his son was very smart, and so he kept him inside the palace compound, which must have been rather large, but the reason for that was he didn't want him to see the conditions of the world that the palace compound was trying to protect him from. But out of curiosity, one day he got his chariot driver, to go out the gate, and there he found himself outside, and he came across four things. First thing he came across was a child being born. And he came out of the womb and he started crying. So And he said to the chariot driver, "What's that?" And he said, "That's birth." And then the Buddha said, Siddhartha said, "That doesn't look very pleasant, actually. I'd like to avoid that." And then the driver said, "Nobody can avoid that, Prince. Everybody has to endure birth." So they went further along the path, and he found a leper. "What's that?" So that's disease. He said, "It doesn't look good. I'd like to avoid it." He says, "No one can avoid that. Everyone is part of the world." So he's taking notes. But then we go a little further down the road, and he saw a person suffering from old age, young people making fun of him, and so on and so forth. And the other physical, the motor functions breaking down and so forth. He said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, that's old age, and can't avoid that either." And of course, the next thing he found was a funeral. What happened? So he died. And he was told by his driver, no one can avoid that. So he saw birth, disease, old age, and death once. One time he saw them. And he thought, if this is what the world is about, then I don't want to be part of that. I have to find another way. And he left. He became the Buddha. He never returned to the palace. Once seeing those things, they're mentioned in the Gita. Knowing these things, understanding it properly, that constitutes knowledge of this world. What the world is like at its naked, in its naked form. Unless you leave the world philosophically and by spiritual pursuit and so forth. So, meanwhile, all the Hindus were pursuing material life, and even extended material life, long material life, by following the Vedas, performing the right sacrifices, and so on and so forth, and harnessing their animality in a religious way, showing gratitude. But he saw through this, the Buddha, in that he said, so if you do it all right and you acquire these things, still you have to die, still you have to get old. And so he had a sattvic kind of disposition. It said that sattvic intelligence is a kind of intelligence that does not allow one to be happy or content in the face of an existence that does not endure. You can't settle in. Because sattva is giving oneself a sense of what I am. It's a mode of nature, but it's a mode of nature that affords clarity of thought and the ability ultimately to discriminate between matter and spirit, and so he could discriminate between that which is enduring and which is not. And however nicely you paint it or decorate it, the world is full of birth, death, disease, and old age, something like that. So the whole elaborate world of material acquisition by adherence to the Veda, which is the people, and again, this is not something just particular to India. You can find it in every religious tradition. You're going to have, the suicide bombers in Islam. They want to go to heaven and have 99 virgins and live there for a long time, and whatever they want. It's a religious life in pursuit of things. Christianity, we have it too. We have it in Hinduism. It's the largest kind of face of religious life, and it's problematic because of its ideal, really. It's an ideal that involves material acquisition, taking. So as much as we are takers, how can we be lovers? And so that orientation is always going to have us at odds to one extent or another with others. Therefore, you find these stories in the Bhagavatam. This is what these stories are about. Someone is on earth performing the sacrifice, and Indra becomes upset in heaven. He comes and foils the sacrifice because he knows that guy does the sacrifice, he's going to get my place in heaven. So the gods are concerned. Indra's concerned about his place in heaven. So inevitably, invariably, life of material acquisition, however nicely you do it, however religiously, and however in accordance with the scripture, it still makes for a lifestyle in a world in which we are at odds with others. And so it takes many shapes. I mean, people are at odds with others, period. And then there's the religious form where people are still at odds with one another to some extent, and sometimes it blows up and becomes very ugly. And religious wars are there, and then the general people who are after the same things say wars are bad. Religion is bad because it brings these wars, and just see, why should I do that? To just be like them, and so forth. So it's a very superficial kind of spiritual orientation, and at its bottom, what's it about? So I can think, why should I do that to acquire when I can do it in another way? I don't see any gods anyway, and I just go get it over here. And of course, it's more thought out because it's thought there would be repercussions if you do it like that, and so forth. But still, it's problematic. So from the Bhakti point of view, we weigh in on that, and therefore Krishna says, Sarva Dharma Pratyajama Mekam Sharanam. Forget this path of Dharma, and all the gods and goddesses are just surrender to me. And that's a categorically different approach. So, and in every religious tradition, there are the mystics also. That approach. You have your Sufis, you have the Christian mystics. So in different to that, Hinduism has its mystics. So you have your religious orientation and your mystical orientation. The religious orientation is about getting things. The mystical orientation is about giving up things. With the knowing and the insight that I'm not a thing. And so what am I? And I am Sat Chit Ananda, for example. So Buddha was faced with a large contingent of people who professed to be followers of the Vedas, who were only interested in material acquisition. And in the context of material acquisition, even within the Vedas, there are things that are done with a license that are nonetheless things that seem undesirable or less desirable. For example, if you want to eat a goat, then you have to perform a certain sacrifice in the Vedas. And at midnight, in the dark moon, and all this ritual has to, this day is described like this. And then just before you kill the goat, you have to whisper in his ear, Mamsa, he means now I'm killing you. And as a result, in the future, you will be able to kill me. So how many times are you going to kill that goat and go the whole thing at midnight and say, what am I saying here? So I can eat it. So then you're supposed to give it up. But as we see also in religious, ritualistic life, sometimes the meanings of them are lost, and the overarching purpose of the Veda, these sections of the Vedas, is to awaken faith in the Veda themselves, and then people will look more deeply into what they're saying. And part of the Veda that's about the Upanishads, it's a smaller section. It's about spiritual life rather than religious life, and ultimately about love of God, and gradually become interested in that. But it doesn't always happen. People get distracted, and empty rituals are performed, and so on and so forth. So the Buddha was apparently, the idea is exposed to that kind of thing. And so his response to the Veda was that if this is what the Veda is about, I'm not interested. Now, we would say the same thing. But we know there's more to the Veda than that. There's the Upanishads. If you look at the Buddha's pursuit, it's fairly Upanishadic. Although he denounces the idea that the Vedas are unauthored and they're a form of revelation. But his whole approach, as we discussed, is similar to a jnani and the pursuit of the deconstruction of the material ego, who is the taker, that which is in pursuit of acquisition and so forth, by which it thinks it will be fortified, the I am American, I am Indian, I am man, woman sense of self is a taker. So he wanted to deconstruct that taker, and that's what the Upanishads talk about as well. So his Buddhism is kind of an outgrowth of the Upanishadic sensibilities, although he does not seek to support it, because the idea is that he was presented with the idea that the Vedas are revelation, therefore they should be followed. But he thought, if revelation tells you to do these things that are stupid, then I can figure out with my own common sense what I do with them. So, I mean, that's a Vaishnava explanation of the Buddha. I mean, it is a little hard to imagine. He wasn't acquainted at all with the Upanishadic tradition, but what I meant when I said that is that the Buddha's pursuit is similar to what the pursuit in the Upanishads are about, the pursuit of, not of things, but of really an end of suffering. Sanatana Goswami says the bliss of Brahman is the end of suffering. So as much as there's happiness in ending suffering, he says, that's what the bliss of Brahman is. Very small in comparison to the bliss of prema. So again, the Buddha and the Shankar's idea, very, very, very similar. Shankar, of course, he took, and Ashoka became, and he became Buddhist, so many people became Buddhists as a result. So called Shankar take the same kind of Buddhist sensibilities and that explains them based on the Upanishads and emphasizes eternal consciousness, which is not emphasized by the Buddha. The Buddha is emphasizing simply deconstruct the false self, as if to say, just do that and the real self will come out anyway. Whatever it is, you don't have to worry about that. That's what you'll be left with. It says it's reasonable to conclude that we suffer in the world, and we suffer because of the thirst to acquire. So give up the thirst for acquiring. That's reasonable. And then you will end suffering. How do you do that? So then he gives a moral life, the eightfold path, conduct oneself in a moral way, and of course then he has the contemplative side of it. So it's basically the kind of lifestyle advocated in the Upanishads. He was a monastic, renunciate. So it's kind of an outgrowth out of Hinduism, and you find karma, reincarnation, all these concepts are there. The subtle world of gods and goddesses is also there. The mind is a reality. There's psychic matter and physical matter. Nirvana, the word nirvana is used in the Gita a number of times. So these concepts aren't coming out of his head entirely. He was a Hindu, but he formed his own religion that rejects the religious side of Hinduism. Just like if I could say, hey, I went to the Jesus camp. You ever see the movie? I went to the Jesus camp and I decided I'm not interested in Christianity, okay? That's weird. It was a movie where they had these kids in the Jesus camp and they were teaching them to kill other people, and the demons out there, the Satan influenced people. It's very cultic to the extreme and so forth. So you could go to that and say, I want nothing to do with Christianity. So this is like Buddha. I want nothing to do with Hinduism. Because he saw a representation of Hinduism that he was exposed to that was about material acquisition, and perhaps worse in some instances, animals sacrifices and so forth. You can relate to it. He said, that's what it's about. I'm not interested. I'm interested in something else. But what he's actually interested in is actually something that's in the mystical tradition of the Veda and Upanishadic side, which is the smaller section of people. Comparatively, therefore, Krishna says, I get try Veda. Most of the Vedas deal with these things, modes of nature. Those who are not interested in the modes of nature, but nirguna, transcendence, where do you even find them? North Carolina, somewhere, in the Himalayas, in a cave. So they're just, they're not readily available. So people come to the conclusion, and then they go, to remote places to find such a thing. So the Buddha was like that in a sense, and he very much, his path is very much based on reasoning. It's really reasoning in a simple way, as I said, as to the nature of suffering and how it ended, and it gets complicated in its logic and whatnot. But it's popular today because it's popular to be rational. How vacuous that actually is, and especially if rational means, if your conclusion of what's rational is materialism, then you've just made your reason meaningless, basically. In the context of materialism, that you've arrived at, by reasoning. The very doctrine of materialism renders your reasoning absolutely no more meaningful in its explanation than the sound of rain falling on the roof. Materialism, there is no meaning, there is no purpose. You can make up a purpose, but there is no real purpose. And there is in materialism, there is no agent of action called self. There's only material, physical forces. That's all there is. It's physical forces. And apparently in materialism, they interact in such a way that this illusion of the self appears at some point. And then you make up meaning and so forth. As much as there is materialism, no agent of action, no self, then reason has no meaning either. An interesting argument about materialism came to mind the other day. I've been reading something and I started to write a little something about it, but there's the doctrine that's of intelligent design. It's we call it a Christian argument. Have probably initiated it, but many different theistic people, one way or another, loosely attach themselves to it, that God designed the world and so forth. Well, the theory of materialism is that by the combination of material components in a certain way, non-living matter, by combining it in a certain way, life manifests. That's materialism. Intelligent design is that by the combination of certain non-living parts, life manifests. The only difference is who put the puzzle together. So in intelligent design, God put it together with just material parts, non-living things becoming living, which is the argument of design against materialism, that life and this argument is Like in classical theism, God is external to the world. Somehow he manifests the world, makes the parts, and brings about life. And the Gaudiya perspective and the Hindu perspective is a pantheistic or a panentheistic, in our case, in the Vaishnava case, panentheistic worldview, where life is consciousness. Biological life is only a reflection of consciousness. Consciousness is life, and it's part of the makeup of the world. There's matter and there's consciousness. And the world is being driven by consciousness. So material forms are appearing in a way that's ultimately being driven by consciousness. Take consciousness to one extent or another. And when the consciousness is gone, then that's the end of the biological organism. It's an interesting difference there. So, at any rate, materialism, how do we get to that? That's one thing, but Buddha, his idea is popular among some people because it's thought not require any faith, belief in any God or any supernatural. It's just about ending suffering. This is a very kind of like this is what you call Buddhism intimidated by materialism, extremely intimidated by scientism, which is a loud voice, and you better watch out for it, because especially if you're getting a degree in the sciences, because if you don't buy into it, you're not going to get a job. So it's a powerful voice. It's a powerful paradigm at this time in the world. And there's reasons for it, and there's some good reasons for it too. I mean, because it's productive of things and conveniences and so forth. It works on some level. You measure here, and you get that. Hey, that's truth. That's just like meter reading is what it is. It's not solving problems with life or answering what life is about. But at any rate, it's popular in the material world at this time. And so if you want a spirituality, you want to not be a nut, not be, you want to be with the in crowd or whatever, the group think, then Buddhism's not bad, because you don't have to believe in the supernatural, and you can still be spiritual. So they are modern day Western Buddhists who say it's not even necessarily the doctrine of Buddhism that there's reincarnation. I mean, they go so far to try to. Buddha was not about doctrine. And I've seen this. I thought, well, you people are really intimidated by materialism in your spiritual thinking and so forth. So anyway, it lends itself a little bit to that. But the problem life of the Buddha, that's another thing. And of course, the Buddha's main focus being the deconstruction of the ego, is, from the Vaishnava perspective, just a focus that doesn't tell the whole story. Because what happens when it is deconstructed? Is there a real self? And there are some Buddhists who say there is, but the Buddha didn't emphasize it. Because if I say to you, you have to destroy yourself so that you can be yourself, that's a little too confusing. So just deconstruct yourself. It's false. That's true. What the Buddha says is entirely true. Deconstruct the false self. Yes. And you will end suffering. Yes. Very true. Is there a God? No need to talk about that. Is there an Atma? There's no need to talk about that. Just focus here. Okay. And you suffering? Yes. You want to end it? Yes. Okay. Here's how you do it. It's an interesting approach. So that's what we were talking about. That was the idea. But Buddhism, it grows out of Hinduism. So you carry all this, a lot of Hindu baggage comes with it, if you will. Now people want to strip it of all of that. Some people.
Just to be clear then, when you said Buddhism stems from Upanishads, it was sensibilities, not strictly. Because I was thinking, is Buddhism, cut off from Vedanta Sutra, and that's why we see such a difference between the Gaudiya, well, it's Sankara, but I was wondering if that was the core difference between them as their structural foundation, as Buddha's looking at the Upanishads, and then the other Sampradas are looking at the Vedanta Sutras.
The Vedanta Sutra is an explanation of the Upanishads.
Yes.
They're not separate.
No.
So the Buddha is not looking at either the Vedanta Sutra or the Upanishads. He's looking just, hey, why believe in this? Look at what crazy people do who believe in these Vedas. Just be reasonable. Again, you can see, practically witness, experience that the life of material acquisition is the life of suffering. So the antithesis will be the end of suffering. And that's true, but the end of suffering is an impoverished idea of happiness. This is the point of the Vaishnavas. Ending suffering is an impoverished idea of happiness. Not taking is an impoverished notion of loving. It's part of loving, it's part of happiness, but happiness is something much more. Love is so much more than that as well. And for that, for love, you need an object of love, and you need to serve, and so on and so forth. If you love someone, you serve. Common sense. So what else? What's the time now?
4:08.
Okay. Yes.
I notice in my own life and in going to work that everybody that I'm associated with, they all have this drive to be something. They want to make themselves a success in the world, and they want to advance, and they want to go up the career ladder and have a more secure position. And I was just thinking that it's so important for me to be able to come back here where people who have as their priority, like the first thing in my life is I want to be devoted to Krishna. And my second, they don't, because everybody else has their priority is like, I want that security. And I when I go there, I feel like I feel their impressions. I get their association. I think maybe I should go forward in the world. And then I think I already have a first priority. And how do I grow and cultivate that sense of this is what I'm about? And then I have other things that go on in life, and I take care of those things, and those are my secondary things. But I already have something that's my priority.
You've already acquired something more valuable.
Yeah.
So that's why the value of these programs, and association, reminded of that. And that becomes the core of your life, and the other parts becomes like music in the background. A habit you go through it as much as is required for your lifestyle, which is in pursuit of bhakti. And it depends upon our lifestyle. For a householder, for example, we may need some income and so forth. But that becomes like secondary, and you have to pay attention to it so that you do it right, and you don't get fired and so forth. But it's not the driving force in your life. Driving force is something else, and that will enable you to see in the workplace and in the world things very differently from them and others do, and even derive inspiration in that situation for your ideas, goals. You can see other people are in pursuit of what they're spending their valuable human energy. You're a paramedic, so where you go on paramedic ladder. I don't know exactly, but here's a person, and they're invested entirely with their entire human energy to somewhere move up the paramedic ladder. And you're looking at that and going, like I'm looking at Krishna consciousness here, your whole human energy for this, so that you can do this. Have a bigger house. You already got a house. You can have a bigger house, a bigger car, and take care of your kids better, and so on and so forth. So, which is so relative, and you might take care of them as best you can, and still you don't know what's going to happen, how that's going to turn out, right? So so you can see that, geez, same human energy. And you can see how shallow the goal is. Now, it doesn't mean that devotees who have a high goal of Krishna consciousness can't work in the world if their approach to Krishna consciousness requires that, and be good in their field and so forth, and even want to get a raise and so forth. But it's with a bigger, it's inside of a much bigger circle of interest and concern. That it just seems like, gosh, all the human energy for that, it's so insignificant.
You won't know the self by becoming a big success at whatever.
That's right. That's right. By becoming a Brahma, Krishna says. So that's as big as it gets. So that example is given to emphasize the point. And there's so many examples in the Bhagavatam of kings and so forth, and there are simple lessons that are being taught in this life of a man who had everything, wasn't happy. We can all nod our heads, but how well have we learned the lesson? On some level, we're trying to be a king. So, they're very some core, common sense, even spiritual truths will change your life if you can really digest them. Radically change your life if you can digest them, put them in place. And you hear the story, I know that the king had everything, wasn't happy, Can we hear another story with a little more deeper, meaning and insight to it? My intelligence is not satisfied by that. I've heard that story a few times. One time, Bhakti Vallabha Tirtha, he said, he was asked about the Prahlad story in the Chaitanya in the Bhagavatam, Prahlad and Sringa. And he said that sometimes people say, I've already heard that story. Can you hear another one? He said, whoever says that has not heard the story. Because if you could do what Prahlad did, is the point, you'd be celebrated throughout the world, so to speak. So, yes, there are higher devotional ideals than the basic Shuddha Bhakti ideal of Prahlad. Prahlad is, you have to go through what Prahlad's position to get anywhere else. That's like the door at the beginning of Shuddha Bhakti. No material desire. And the Srimad Bhagavan is saying, take something from me, I'm here. No, I take something, I'm God. I come before people and who want benedictions, I give them. Take. I don't want anything. Take. No. I'll make it to China. No, you're different. So as I say, these are a lot of the foundational points are very simple, and they're understood by people. At least they'll nod their head, yeah, but then to act accordingly. Really, on your level where you're at, it's not just, I know I don't want to become a king. I don't want to become, corporate CEO. Those guys are gross. But someone asked me the other day, like I was explaining something about Krishna consciousness, and he said, what about they're doing this and they're doing that. And he's talking about the corporate, corporatism and exploitation and so forth. They're doing this and they're doing that. And then I said, who are they? And I said, when you understand that you are they, then you can solve the problem. You are they. You are a corporatist on some level. You're complaining about what they're doing. But on some level, you are doing the same thing. That's a fact. You can watch a herd of cows. The smallest cows are always getting pushed around. So they're poor. You take that little cow, put her in a herd of other cows. They're all smaller, and then what she do? She starts pushing them around instead of thinking, I was pushed around. No, I don't want to push anybody around. No. So anyway, on some level, material life means it's unavoidable that we are, the CEO, and we're taking, and other people we're takers, in other words. We're exploiting as much as the CEO or whatever exploits. Material life is a life of exploitation. We identify with ourselves with the body. If we don't take from the environment, then it appears that the body and the body's sense of self will be in jeopardy. So you're hunting, and look over your shoulder, you're being hunted. Also, this is the principle of karma. So, you should take all that angst against, the 1% of 1%. They're so bad. Yeah, they're just a big example of what you are a small example of, actually. And so, uproot it from yourself. Uproot it from yourself entirely. That's the teaching of the Gita. And you become big by becoming small and not being a taker. There's something to be said for attaching oneself to better forms of badness, better forms of exploitation, milder forms rather than ugly, obvious forms. But it's important to understand the underlying reality of material existence. It's not going to be solved by, electing Bernie Sanders or something, It's not going to save the world, I can tell you that. Just to give you an example, a modern example. So, and greed. Where does it end? Is there any in you? Okay, then start there. That's my political speech. Start there. Greed in everyone. Sound like the Pope there. That's true. Basic spiritual truth and what the world would be like if everybody addressed this. It would solve the problem. Sound very simplistic, but it's not simplistic because it's unrealistic. We can't do that. Okay, then expect the problems to continue. It's unavoidable. There's no way around it. The basic truths of spiritual life are the solutions to all the problems. You cannot come up with another formula that will solve all the problems. Only a spiritual solution really addresses all the problems. The reason it's not taken up is it seems unrealistic, because it has as its goal you becoming supernatural, transcending the limits of your humanity, giving up greed, lust. Hey, they will say, I don't even know if I want to give that up. What would life be without that? Try it. This is the problem. These are the problems. So if you look carefully at sadhana, what we're talking about, sadhana, spiritual practice, it is a solution to all the problems of life. But again, it asks a lot. What do you expect? You want a comprehensive solution to all the problems of life, and it should be cheap? Buy it at Walmart? Oh, it's expensive, yeah. What does it cost? Everything you have. Any other questions? Everything you have. I think that's too much. What, to solve all the problems? But how if I do that, it will solve all the problems. You start with your problems, solve all your problems, and then you be an example. And no one will listen to you, but that's the world. Still, what you say is right. And actions speak louder than words. If you can exemplify it, then it will speak to some. You have to start somewhere. You start there. It's undeniable. This is the solution to all the problems. It doesn't matter how sophisticated of another solution you come up with. It's not gonna work. And people know that. I'm thinking something's better than nothing. We try this here. Because the whole solution, that's too complicated. And so you can be sure. Material world has no beginning. You know what else it has? Has no end. It can end for you, but it will go on forever. That's about it. All right, let's stop there. Sri Gauramadava ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinda ki jai. Gaur Premanand.
BV Tripurari Swami Guru Maharaj ki jai.